Have you ever wondered what a single act of kindness could cost you, or what it might gain you in return? Picture this: a hardworking gas station employee, a man of color, steps in to help an elderly stranger in need, only to face betrayal and lose everything he's worked for. But what if that stranger held the key to a life-changing opportunity? At a busy gas station in Atlanta, Georgia, Marcus Jackson's simple act of generosity sets off a chain of events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned as we unravel a story of compassion, betrayal, and an unexpected twist that changes everything. A tale brought to you by Daily Narrated Stories, where we share the moments that remind us of the power of humanity. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Atlanta, painting the cracked pavement of a small gas station in warm hues of gold and amber. The air was heavy with the sharp tang of gasoline, mingling with the faint hum of engines and the impatient honks of customers in a hurry. Amid the chaos, Marcus Jackson, a 32-year-old black man, moved with quiet efficiency. His faded uniform was neatly pressed, a testament to his pride in a job that, while thankless, was his lifeline. His hands, rough from years of labor, worked quickly, filling tanks, wiping down windshields, and offering polite smiles to customers who rarely returned the gesture. For Marcus, this job wasn't just about the paycheck. It was about survival. With a mother battling chronic pain and a young son depending on him, every shift mattered. The long hours, the exhaustion, the dismissive glances from those who saw him as just another worker. They all paled in comparison to the fear of failing his family. Marcus had learned early on that you do what you must to keep going, no matter the cost. But as he finished cleaning the windshield of a rusty sedan, a commotion at Pump 3 caught his attention, pulling him into a moment that would change his life forever. Marcus turned toward the noise, his gaze landing on an elderly man standing beside a silver sedan. The man's hands trembled as he patted his pockets, his face creased with worry. "I swear I had it," he muttered, rifling through his coat for the third time. His voice was shaky, tinged with the kind of panic that comes from realizing you're in a bind with no way out. Marcus's heart clenched. He'd seen that look before, on his mother's face when she couldn't afford her medication years ago, a memory that still haunted him. It was a cold winter evening, 5 years back, when Clara had sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling not from pain but from shame, as she whispered, "I'll be fine, Marcus. We'll figure it out." But they hadn't figured it out. Not without Marcus skipping meals for a week to scrape together enough for her prescription. That moment had etched itself into his soul, a reminder of what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of a world that didn't care. Now, watching the elderly man, Marcus felt that same helplessness radiating from him. The man's gray hair was thinning, his coat threadbare at the elbows, and his eyes, clouded with age, held a quiet desperation. Marcus's chest tightened as he imagined the man's story. Maybe he was a widower, living alone, or a grandfather who'd promised to pick up his grandkids, but now faced humiliation over a forgotten wallet. Marcus didn't know the man's truth, but he knew the feeling of being judged, of being reduced to a problem rather than a person. He'd felt it too many times himself. Customers at the station who wouldn't meet his eyes, who spoke to him like he was invisible, their voices clipped with impatience or disdain. It was a weight he carried every day, a silent reminder of how the world saw him. A black man in a uniform, nothing more. A sharp voice sliced through the moment, pulling Marcus back to the present. "Sir, if you can't pay, that's not my problem." Marcus's eyes flicked to the source. Ethan, a wiry co-worker with a permanent scowl, leaning against the pump with his arms crossed. Ethan had been at the station for just over a year, but his cynicism made him seem older. His sharp jawline and cold blue eyes gave him a predatory air, like he was always looking for a weakness to exploit. Marcus had never liked him. Ethan was the kind of person who thrived on others' misfortune, who saw kindness as a flaw to be mocked. "I just need a minute," the old man pleaded, his voice cracking with embarrassment. "I must have left my wallet at home. It's just a few blocks away. I'll be right back." Ethan let out a harsh laugh, the sound grating against the humid air. "Yeah, right. I've heard that one before. Pay up, or I'm calling the cops. Your choice." The threat hung heavy, a dark cloud over the already tense scene. The old man's shoulders slumped, his face pale with humiliation, and Marcus could see the defeat settling into his bones. It was a look Marcus knew too well. The look of someone who'd been beaten down by life one too many times, who expected nothing but judgment. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides, his mind racing. He could hear his mother's voice in his head, a lesson she'd drilled into him since he was a boy. You don't turn your back on someone who needs you, Marcus. Not if you can help it. But helping came with a cost, and Marcus knew it. He only had $30 in his wallet. Money he'd been saving for Liam's school supplies, a new backpack the boy had been begging for. If he used it now, he'd have to explain to Liam why he couldn't keep his promise. The thought made his stomach twist, but the alternative, walking away, leaving this man to face Ethan's cruelty, was worse. Marcus took a step forward, brushing past Ethan, who shot him a glare. "Sir, it's okay," Marcus said, his voice steady and warm, like a lifeline in a storm. "You don't need to explain." The old man looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, as if he couldn't believe someone was speaking to him with kindness. Ethan snorted, rolling his eyes so hard Marcus could practically hear it. "Don't be stupid, Marcus. This guy's probably scamming you. You're really gonna fall for this." His tone dripped with contempt, each word a jab meant to undermine Marcus's decision. Marcus ignored him, though the words stung. He'd heard that tone before, from customers, from bosses, from people who assumed he was naive or foolish because he chose to care. But Marcus wasn't naive, he was tired. Tired of a world that punished kindness, tired of pretending he didn't see the pain around him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet with a quiet resolve. His fingers brushed against the worn leather, a gift from Clara when he'd gotten this job 5 years ago. It was one of the few things he owned that held sentimental value, a reminder of better days. He counted out a $20 bill, money he couldn't afford to lose, and handed it to Ethan. "This should cover it," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Ethan stared at the bill, then at Marcus, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Your funeral, man." He snatched the money, stuffing it into the register with a shake of his head. "You're too soft. People like him see guys like you and think, easy mark. You'll learn." The words cut deeper than Marcus wanted to admit. He'd heard them before, in different forms, from different people. "You're too soft, Marcus. Too trusting. Too good." It was what his high school friends had said when he'd refused to join them in petty theft, choosing instead to work odd jobs to help Clara pay the bills. It was what his ex-girlfriend had said before she left, frustrated by his inability to toughen up and put himself first. And now, here was Ethan, echoing the same sentiment, as if Marcus's compassion was a weakness to be exploited. But Marcus didn't see it that way. He saw it as strength, the kind of strength that kept him going through long shifts, through rude customers, through the constant grind of a life that never seemed to get easier. He turned back to the old man, whose eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. "No one does things like this anymore." The gratitude in his tone was raw, unfiltered, and it hit Marcus like a wave. For a moment, he felt a flicker of pride, a rare warmth in a day that had been nothing but cold. "We all forget things sometimes, sir," Marcus said, managing a small, weary smile. "Don't worry about it." The old man hesitated, then pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, scribbling down a name, address, and phone number with a shaky hand. "Please, let me pay you back," he said, pressing the note into Marcus's hand. "My name's Henry Caldwell. I'll make this right." Marcus glanced at the paper, the ink smudged but legible, then nodded. "Take care, Mr. Caldwell." As the elderly man drove off, Marcus felt Ethan's gaze burning into him, a silent judgment that made his skin crawl. "You think that was smart?" Ethan muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. "He's probably laughing at you right now, driving off with your money." Marcus exhaled slowly, tucking the note into his pocket. "And if he's not?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Ethan didn't respond, just scoffed and turned away, his sneakers scuffing against the pavement as he walked back to the counter. Marcus returned to his work, but the weight of what he'd done lingered, a quiet unease settling in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that this moment wasn't over, that something bigger was coming, though he couldn't say what. The station buzzed around him, the usual chaos of a late afternoon shift. A mother with 2 kids in the back seat honked impatiently, a truck driver shouted for a receipt, and the air grew thicker with the heat of the day. Marcus moved through it all on autopilot, his mind replaying the interaction with Henry Caldwell. What if Ethan was right? What if the man had been scamming him? The thought gnawed at him, a seed of doubt planted by Ethan's words. But then he thought of the man's eyes, the genuine gratitude in his voice, and the doubt faded. Marcus had done what he felt was right, and that had to count for something, didn't it? Moments later, a crackling voice echoed over the intercom, shattering his thoughts. Marcus, office. Now, the tone belonged to Greg Thompson, the station manager, and it was sharp enough to make Marcus's stomach twist. He glanced at Ethan, who smirked as if he'd been waiting for this. Told you, Ethan said with a shrug, his voice laced with a smug satisfaction that made Marcus's blood boil. Play the hero, get burned. Marcus wiped his hands on his uniform, his heart pounding as he made his way to the small, dimly lit office at the back of the station. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself were trying to hold him back. He knew Greg's tone, sharp, unyielding, the kind that meant trouble. But what kind of trouble, Marcus couldn't guess. Had Ethan said something? Had a customer complained? The uncertainty gnawed at him, a quiet dread that grew with every second. Inside, Greg sat behind a cluttered desk, his thinning hair slicked back, his expression a mix of irritation and forced neutrality. The office smelled of stale coffee and old paper, the air thick with the weight of authority. Close the door, Greg said without looking up, tapping a pen against a stack of papers. Marcus obeyed, standing stiffly near the chair in front of the desk, his hands clasped behind his back. He felt like a schoolboy called to the principal's office, though he hadn't done anything wrong. Or had he? The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, as Greg flipped through a few sheets of paper, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. Finally, he sighed, looking up with a weary expression. Care to explain what happened out there? Marcus kept his voice even, though his pulse raced. An elderly man forgot his wallet after refueling. I paid for him with my own money. Greg raised an eyebrow, his gaze piercing. Your own money? Yes, sir. The words felt hollow, inadequate, as if they couldn't possibly convey the weight of what Marcus had done. Greg slid a piece of paper across the desk, a formal write-up slip. Marcus's stomach dropped, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. He stared at the paper, his name in bold ink, and felt the world tilt beneath him. I get it, Marcus, Greg said, rubbing his temple as if the conversation were a burden he didn't want to bear. You thought you were doing the right thing. But this isn't about being a good guy. It's about policy. We don't let people leave without paying, and we don't play charity on the clock. Marcus's eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance flaring in his chest. I didn't take money from the register. His voice was steady, but inside, he was unraveling. He thought of the register, of the careful way he'd always handled every transaction, never once stepping out of line. He'd been meticulous, knowing that as a black man in this job, he couldn't afford even the appearance of a mistake. But Greg shrugged, his expression dismissive. Ethan says otherwise. The words hit Marcus like a slap, igniting a sharp anger that burned through his fear. Ethan's lie was a betrayal, a calculated move to undermine him, and Marcus felt the sting of it deep in his bones. He forced himself to stay calm, though his hands curled into fists at his sides. Ethan's lying. We can check the register right now. Every cent is there. Greg sighed, as if Marcus were a child who didn't understand the rules of the game. It's not about the money, Marcus. It's about precedent. If we let this slide, every employee will think they can do the same. Next thing you know, we're handing out gas like a charity. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears, a deafening rhythm that drowned out the hum of the station outside. So you're firing me over $20? Over a lot. His voice trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief, the reality of the situation crashing over him like a wave. Greg shook his head, his tone final, unyielding. I'm firing you because you made a decision that wasn't yours to make. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He'd given years to this job, 5 years of early mornings, late nights, and endless shifts, never late, never stealing, always taking the worst hours because he needed the money. He'd endured the rude customers, the snide comments, the constant pressure to prove himself, all because he had a family to support. And now, it was gone, stripped away over a single moment of kindness. His hands trembled as he stared at the write-up slip, his name in bold ink, a mark of shame he didn't deserve. "You want me to sign this?" he asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. Greg pushed the pen toward him, his expression cold. "It's already done. Signing won't change anything." Marcus exhaled sharply, the sound harsh in the small office. He stared at the paper for a long moment, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Anger at Ethan, frustration at Greg, fear for his family's future. Then, without a word, he turned on his heel and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed in his chest. He didn't need to sign to know he'd just lost everything. Stepping out of the office, Marcus felt the world blur around him. The hum of engines, the beep of the register, the chatter of customers, it all faded into a distant hum, as if he were underwater. His body was tense, his mind a storm of emotions he couldn't untangle. Ethan was still at the counter, his smirk as smug as ever, a predator who'd just won his game. "Guess being a hero doesn't pay, huh?" he said with mock sympathy, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Marcus stopped, his chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. He wanted to lash out, to demand why Ethan had lied, to make him feel the weight of what he'd done. But what was the point? Ethan had already won, and Marcus had nothing left to fight with. Instead, he met Ethan's gaze, his voice eerily calm, though it trembled with suppressed rage. "One day, Ethan, you'll need someone to give you a chance. I hope you remember this when that day comes." The words were a quiet warning, a promise that karma would find its way. Ethan chuckled, unfazed, pushing off the counter with a casual shrug. "We'll see." Marcus didn't respond. He turned away, grabbed his bag from the back room, and stepped into the fading light of the evening, the weight of his new reality settling in like a stone in his chest. Just like that, it was over. The walk home was heavier than usual, each step a reminder of what he'd lost. Normally, Marcus took the bus, but tonight he needed the air, the movement, anything to process the storm in his mind. The streets of Atlanta's West End buzzed with life. Cars honking, the smell of fried chicken wafting from a nearby stand, kids laughing as they raced their bikes down the sidewalk. It was all so normal, but Marcus felt like he was drowning in a sea of his own thoughts. He'd always been careful, swallowing his pride to keep this job because he had no choice. He wasn't a kid who could afford to mess up. He had rent to pay, a mother who needed medicine, a son who needed clothes and books. And now he had nothing. The weight of it all pressed down on him, a crushing force that made his chest ache. He thought of Liam, of the backpack he'd promised, of the way his son's face would fall when Marcus told him they couldn't afford it. He thought of Clara, of the medicine she needed, of the way her hands shook when the pain was too much. He thought of the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the late notices he'd been ignoring, the landlord's warnings about missed payments. It was all too much, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt the sting of tears behind his eyes. He blinked them back, refusing to let them fall, but the fear remained, a cold, unyielding presence that followed him all the way home. He reached the small duplex he called home, the porch light flickering as he climbed the steps, his chest tight with dread. He pushed open the door, the scent of warm cornbread and greens hitting him like a wave of comfort he didn't deserve. His mother, Clara Jackson, sat in her usual chair by the window, her hands resting in her lap, stiff from her chronic pain. Her sharp eyes met his, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern in an instant. "You're home early," she said, her voice steady but probing, the kind of tone that told Marcus she already knew something was wrong. Before Marcus could answer, a burst of energy rushed into the room. Dad, his 7-year-old son, Liam, crashed into him, wrapping his small arms around Marcus's waist. "You're home early. Can we go to the park?" The boy's voice was bright, full of hope, and it broke Marcus's heart. He forced a smile, resting a hand on Liam's head, his fingers brushing against the soft curls. "Not tonight, buddy." Liam pouted but didn't argue, skipping off to the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing in his father's heart. Clara, however, wasn't so easily distracted. "Marcus," she said, her tone firm, her eyes searching his face. "What happened?" Marcus sat across from her, rubbing a hand over his face, the exhaustion of the day settling into his bones. He didn't hold back. He told her everything. The old man, the money, Ethan's lie, Greg's decision. As he spoke, he felt the weight of each word, the reality of his situation sinking in deeper with every sentence. By the time he finished, Clara's lips were pressed into a thin line, her hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "You did the right thing, Marcus." Marcus let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow, echoing in the small room. "Doing the right thing doesn't pay the bills, Mom." The words were sharp, laced with a frustration he couldn't contain. He thought of the bills again, of the empty fridge, of the promises he'd made to Liam. Clara tilted her head, her gaze softening, her eyes filled with a quiet wisdom that had always anchored him. "Maybe not, but it's what makes you the kind of man Liam can look up to." Her words hit him hard, a reminder of the values she'd instilled in him, the values he'd tried to live by even when the world made it so damn hard. But they couldn't erase the fear gnawing at him. How would he provide for them now? He thought back to that winter 5 years ago, the memory resurfacing with a clarity that made his chest ache. He'd come home one night to find Clara sitting in the dark, the heat turned off because they couldn't afford the bill. She tried to hide her pain, but Marcus had seen the way her hands shook, the way her breath hitched with every movement. He'd promised her then that he'd never let her go without again, that he'd do whatever it took to keep them afloat. And now he'd failed. The guilt was a heavy weight, a burden he couldn't shake, and it made the loss of his job feel even more devastating. As that thought settled, a firm knock echoed through the house, cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Marcus's eyes flicked to Clara, who raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. He wasn't expecting anyone. Liam, still playing near the kitchen, froze, his small face lighting up with hope. "Are we getting pizza?" he asked, his voice bright with excitement. Marcus managed a weak chuckle, but a quiet unease settled in his chest. In his neighborhood, unannounced visitors usually meant trouble, someone looking for money, or worse. He stood, bracing himself as he made his way to the door, his hand hovering over the knob for a moment before he opened it. Standing on the porch, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlight, was Henry Caldwell. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a tall, elegantly dressed woman in her late 40s, her sharp eyes and poised demeanor commanding attention. Marcus immediately noticed the resemblance. This was Henry's daughter. For a moment, no one spoke. Henry smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Told you I'd come back." Marcus blinked, his mind racing, a mix of confusion and cautious hope stirring in his chest. He stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Please, come in." Henry stepped inside, followed by the woman, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The faint scent of her expensive perfume, clean and understated, filled the air, a stark contrast to the modest warmth of Marcus's home. Clara straightened in her chair, her gaze flicking between the two visitors, her expression unreadable but alert. "Mama, this is Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. "I helped him at the station today." Clara nodded, her tone polite but guarded, her eyes sharp as she assessed the strangers in her home. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Caldwell." Henry tipped his head respectfully, his smile genuine. "The pleasure's mine, ma'am." Marcus turned to the woman, still unsure of her role in this unexpected visit. "And you are?" She extended a hand, her grip firm and confident, her presence radiating authority. "Lydia Caldwell. My father told me about what happened today, and I wanted to meet you myself." Marcus shook her hand, exhaling slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. What can I do for you?" Henry and Lydia exchanged a glance, a silent communication that made Marcus's curiosity spike. Henry pulled a folded $20 bill from his pocket, holding it out to Marcus. "First, I need to pay you back." Marcus let out a short laugh, shaking his head, the gesture more out of disbelief than amusement. "Mr. Caldwell, you didn't have to come all this way for that." Henry's expression softened, his eyes warm with gratitude. "It's not just about the money, son. It's about respect." Reluctantly, Marcus took the bill, slipping it into his pocket, the crisp paper a small reminder of the choice he'd made. "I appreciate it, but I'm guessing that's not the only reason you're here." Lydia stepped forward, placing a sleek black business card on the coffee table. The gold lettering gleamed under the dim light. "Caldwell Energy Solutions, Lydia Caldwell, Executive Vice President. Marcus's eyebrows lifted, a flicker of recognition sparking in his mind. He knew that name. Caldwell Energy was a major player in Georgia's fuel industry, with stations and refineries across the state. Their logo was on half the gas pumps in Atlanta, a symbol of power and success that felt worlds away from Marcus's reality. Lydia clasped her hands in front of her, her posture poised but her tone direct. My father isn't just any customer. He's the founder of this company, and I oversee its operations. Marcus's lips parted, but no words came, his mind struggling to process the revelation. Henry chuckled softly, the sound warm and genuine. Surprised? Marcus exhaled sharply, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over him. Yeah, I can't lie. This isn't how I expected today to end. The understatement felt almost comical, given the roller coaster of the past few hours. Lydia nodded, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp, assessing. I imagine not. But here's the thing, Marcus. You didn't know who my father was when you helped him. You didn't stop to think about what you might gain. You just did what was right. Her words were a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition of Marcus's character that made his chest tighten with a mix of pride and vulnerability. Marcus rubbed a hand over his jaw, still processing, his mind racing with questions. I'm not sure what that has to do with me now. Lydia's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, the kind that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment. It has everything to do with you. We're opening a new station on the east side, and we need a manager, someone we can trust, someone who knows that running a business isn't just about rules. It's about people. Marcus's heart stopped, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy blanket. He glanced at Clara, whose expression remained unreadable, though her fingers tightened in her lap, a subtle sign of her own surprise. He looked at Liam, who was now sitting on the floor, flipping through a book but listening intently, his small face a mix of curiosity and excitement. Then he turned back to Lydia, his voice barely above a whisper. You want me to run a gas station for Caldwell Energy? The question felt surreal, as if he were speaking someone else's lines in a play he hadn't rehearsed for. Lydia nodded, her tone steady, confident. Yes, you'd need training, of course, and you'd have to work your way into the role. But I believe you're the right person for it. Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once. This morning, he was an attendant, struggling to make ends meet. This afternoon, he was jobless, facing an uncertain future. And now, he was being offered a management position at a major company, a chance to change everything. It didn't seem real, and yet, here they were, standing in his living room, offering him a lifeline. Why me? He finally asked, his voice raw, the question spilling out before he could stop it. Henry smiled, his eyes warm, crinkling at the corners with a kindness that felt genuine. Because, son, we need more people in this world who do the right thing when no one's watching. The words hit Marcus like a wave, washing over him with a warmth he hadn't expected. He thought of Greg, of Ethan, of how easily they'd discarded him, how quickly they'd turned his act of kindness into a reason to cast him aside. And then he thought of the bills piling up, of Clara's medicine, of Liam's future, of the life he'd been fighting so hard to build. This offer wasn't just a job. It was a chance, a second shot at something better, something he could be proud of. After a long silence, he met Lydia's gaze, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. I'm in. The words felt monumental, a declaration of hope, of determination, of a future he hadn't dared to dream of. Lydia extended her hand again, and Marcus shook it, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a promise. Henry clapped a hand on his shoulder, grinning, his voice full of warmth. Told you we came here for a reason. And just like that, Marcus Jackson's life took a turn he never could have imagined. The next morning, Marcus stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his best button-down shirt. It wasn't new, but it was clean, and it was the best he had. Today wasn't just another day. It was the start of something new, something bigger. He took a deep breath, staring at his reflection. A gas station manager. He never thought those words would apply to him. But now, thanks to a single act of kindness, his life had shifted in ways he couldn't have dreamed. In the living room, Clara watched him with quiet pride, her hands folded in her lap. Liam, still in his pajamas, grinned up at him, swinging his legs from his chair. "You look like a boss, Dad," he said brightly. Marcus chuckled, kneeling to press a kiss to his son's forehead. "I'm a boss now, buddy." Liam's eyes widened. "Does that mean you get to tell people what to do?" "Something like that," Marcus said with a smile. Clara shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "You've always been a leader, Marcus. Now the world gets to see it." Marcus nodded, his throat tight as he glanced around their small, warm home. For the first time in years, he wasn't just scraping by. He was building a future. As he stepped outside, the morning sun bathed the street in a golden glow, and he inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of uncertainty lift. Second chances were rare, and he wasn't about to waste this one. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Marcus walked into Caldwell Energy's corporate office for his first day of training, feeling like an outsider in a world of glass doors and polished floors. Lydia met him in the lobby, holding a folder with his name on it. "This isn't just about pumping gas anymore, Marcus," she told him. "You're going to learn how to run an entire operation. Inventory, payroll, customer service, compliance. It's a lot, but I know you can do it." The training was grueling. Marcus spent hours poring over company policies, fuel logistics, and financial reports, things he'd never had to think about before. Every night, he came home exhausted, his mind buzzing with numbers and regulations. But he pushed through, driven by the memory of that moment he'd almost lost everything. Failure wasn't an option. By the third week, things started to click. He could handle scheduling, resolve complaints, and balance the books with growing confidence. The fear of failing faded, replaced by a quiet pride he hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, as he wrapped up a shift at one of Caldwell Energy's busiest stations, the manager, a no-nonsense man named Victor Hayes, clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You're ready, Marcus." Marcus froze. "For what?" Victor smirked. "To take over your own station. Lydia's got the paperwork ready." Marcus could hardly believe it. Just weeks ago, he'd been fired, humiliated, and unsure of how he'd provide for his family. Now, he stepped into the new Caldwell Energy station on the east side, not as a worker, but as the manager. The uniform felt different now, the weight on his shoulders not just about survival, but about building something. As he watched his new team begin their shifts, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. For the first time in years, he wasn't just getting by, he was in control of his future. This journey taught him that kindness, even when it comes at a cost, can open doors you never imagined. It's a reminder that in a world often filled with cynicism, a single act of compassion can ripple outward, changing lives in ways we can't predict. What would you do if you were Marcus? Would you take the risk to help a stranger, knowing it might cost you everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going. Your story might inspire someone else watching right now. Marcus's story is a testament to the power of resilience, hope, and the courage to do what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're committed to bringing you tales like this, stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us of the good in the world. Don't miss out on more life-changing narratives like Marcus's. Hit that subscribe button now, turn on the notification bell, and join our community before this moment passes, because stories like these don't wait, and neither should you. Let's keep spreading hope, one story at a time, with Daily Narrated Stories.